Usually when we talk about a massive, sprawling piece of national infrastructure, there is this fundamental expectation of visibility. Like you can physically see the massive steel suspension bridges or, the multi-lane highways stretching across the landscape.
Right, or the towering high-voltage power lines cutting through the mountains. You look at those things and you instantly understand, okay, that is infrastructure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's obvious. But then think about the water supply of a major metropolis. Most of us, we just walk into our kitchens, we turn the tap, and we expect clean, pressurized water to flow. We do not spend our days thinking about the hidden reservoirs or, the subterranean high-pressure mains.
Or the complex chemical filtration plants.
Yeah. Or the city planners who orchestrate all of it to ensure you don't get sick when you take a sip. It's completely hidden.
And, I mean, it is invisible by design, right? That
Yeah.
kind of foundational infrastructure only really becomes visible to the public when it breaks down.
Which is terrifying. And today, for you listening, staring down the barrel of your upcoming exam, that invisible system is exactly what we are going to expose and explore. You're looking at a pretty daunting mountain of source material.
Oh, yeah. Chapter 13 of the Reserve Bank of India's materials.
Right, focusing entirely on payment and settlement systems. And look, on the surface, it looks like a dense, intimidating, just jargon-filled textbook chapter. But what it actually represents is the literal source code that prevents India's economy from freezing overnight.
That is exactly what it is.
It is the hidden blueprint of the nation's financial water supply. And the RBI. They are the city planner, the heavy-duty pipe manufacturer, and, the ruthless water quality inspector all rolled into one entity.
That's the perfect conceptual lens for this material, and today's mission is to act as your ultimate study companions. I mean, we are not here to just give you a light, superficial summary of Chapter 13.
No, we are going deep.
We are going to deeply unpack the mechanics of this system. We are going to verbally construct a comprehensive, exhaustive, text-based blueprint for an infographic.
Yes, a mental model you can actually use.
By the end of this deep dive, the framework we built together should be so detailed and, so structurally sound that studying it will practically eliminate your need to endlessly reread the dry textbook text.
I love that. We're going to map out the entire plumbing, from the ancient days of trading physical metal all the way to the lightning-fast 247 digital miracles like the unified payments interface that we frankly just take for granted today.
Absolutely.
So let's start with Section 1 of this blueprint, the absolute bedrock, the core concept. If you were giving a title to this mental model we are building, something to encapsulate the entire overarching theme of this chapter, I think we have to call it the engine of trust. How the RBI orchestrates India's payment and settlement ecosystem.
The engine of trust. That's a strong title.
But I want to pause right there on that specific word, trust. Because why is trust the operative, most critical word when we're talking about cold, hard economics? I mean, if I walk into a store right now and hand the cashier a crisp 500 note, it has intrinsic value, doesn't it? It is cash. It's real, tangible value.
See, that assumption right there, that is one of the most common misconceptions in economics, and it is an absolute classic trap for students on exams.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Modern fiat money has absolutely zero intrinsic value. I mean, none. That piece of paper is not secretly backed by a vault full of gold bars somewhere in Mumbai.
Right, the gold standard has been dead for a while.
Exactly. It's just a piece of cotton blend paper or polymer, or, in the digital realm, literally just a string of binary code in a database. It is entirely fiduciary.
Fiduciary. Okay, let's unpack that term for the listener.
Sure. The term stems from the Latin word fiducia, which translates literally to trust or confidence. The only reason that cashier accepts your 500 note in exchange for actual physical groceries is because they have absolute trust that the entity who issued that note, so the sovereign government and the central bank, will honor its value.
And that everyone else in the economy will accept it from them in turn.
Exactly. The central bank's entire role in payment systems, like its paramount reason for existing, is to manufacture, regulate, and rigorously maintain that trust. If that trust evaporates, the paper just becomes worthless paper.
The digital numbers become meaningless.
And the economy basically collapses straight back into a barter system.
Wow. So because we all collectively sort of believe that the 500 note has value, the invisible hand of the economy can actually do its job. The RBI isn't just printing money. They are maintaining this massive collective psychological agreement.
Precisely. And this leads to the core two-sentence summary of the entire chapter. This is the foundation of your mental infographic. Sentence 1. The Reserve Bank of India ensures economic and financial stability by acting simultaneously as the system provider, the regulator, and the user of the nation's payment infrastructure.
Okay, provider, regulator, and user. Got it.
Right. And by wearing all three of those hats, they ensure trust in both physical fiat and digital transactions. And sentence 2. Through continuous technological innovation and incredibly stringent oversight, the RBI has managed to take a paper-heavy, fragmented, localized network and transform it into a globally recognized, interoperable 247 digital payment powerhouse.
That sets the stage perfectly. But, this incredibly sophisticated digital powerhouse, it didn't just spawn out of thin air in the 21st century.
No, definitely not.
The sources we were looking at, they trace the evolution of this plumbing back thousands of years. And examiners absolutely love chronological sequences, right? Because it proves you understand how one system necessitated the next.
Oh, they love a good timeline.
So for section 2 of our blueprint, the timeline and chronology, let's trace exactly how we got here.
It really is a fascinating evolution. We can categorize this into distinct historical phases, starting with what we'll call the ancient and medieval phase.
Okay, going way back.
Yeah, the very first payment instruments in the Indian subcontinent were physical coins, specifically punch-marked or cast in silver and copper. This was the era where the payment instrument itself actually was the intrinsic value.
Right, so you were literally trading physical metal for wheat.
Exactly.
Which, that works fine if you're buying a loaf of bread in your own village. But if you're carrying 20 pounds of silver across a bandit-filled highway to buy a herd of cattle in the next state, that is a logistical nightmare.
A very dangerous nightmare.
And the sources mention this incredible pivot to solve that, an instrument called an adesha from the Mauryan period. It just shows humans have essentially been trying to perfect the IOU for thousands of years.
That is exactly what an adesha was. It was an order directed to a banker or a merchant, basically desiring him to pay the specific money of the note to a third person. It is widely considered the ancient ancestor of the modern bill of exchange.
So instead of moving heavy, dangerous metal, you just moved a trusted piece of information.
Right. And as trade expanded into the 12th century, we see the widespread use of hundis.
Ah, hundis. I've heard of those.
Yeah, they were highly sophisticated credit and remittance instruments. They were used extensively by Indian merchants for long-distance trade, and they are arguably the oldest surviving form of credit instrument in India.
But they relied entirely on the reputation and trust of those specific merchant networks, right?
Entirely. It was all about local trust.
Okay, but those were still largely localized networks between specific trading families. To get to the modern era, we have to look at the 18th and 19th century, the era where paper truly takes over.
The paper era. So paper money, in the modern sense of circulating currency, originated in the late 18th century in India. It began with promissory notes issued by private banks.
Private banks issuing their own money.
Yes. You had institutions like the Bank of Hindustan and the General Bank in Bengal and Bihar issuing their own branded paper. But as you can imagine, this created an incredibly chaotic environment.
Let's put ourselves in that environment to really understand it. Imagine you are a merchant in, 1850s Calcutta. You have a stack of paper notes issued by 3 different private banks.
Right.
Every single day you have to worry. Is Bank A going to go bankrupt overnight? If it does, my paper from Bank A is instantly garbage. Furthermore, if I travel from Calcutta to Bombay, the merchants there might look at my Calcutta banknote and say, I don't know this bank, I'm going to charge you a 20% discount just to accept this piece of paper. The friction for national trade would be catastrophic.
It was completely unsustainable, which leads to one of the most critical dates you must memorize for your exam, the 1861 Paper Currency Act.
Okay, 1861. Why does that specific act change the fundamental physics of the economy?
Because the 1861 Act conferred upon the government of India the absolute exclusive monopoly on note issuance, it legally forced an end to private banks and presidency banks issuing their own circulating notes.
Oh, wow. So this is the ultimate centralization of trust.
Exactly.
By stripping the private banks of this power, the sovereign government steps in as the ultimate unquestionable guarantor. A rupee in Calcutta is suddenly worth exactly a rupee in Bombay, and neither merchant has to worry about a local bank run destroying their life savings. It just eliminates that localized systemic risk from the currency itself.
That is the exact mechanism of change. And following that centralization, the next major evolutionary step was standardizing how non-cash instruments worked. So in 1881, the Negotiable Instruments Act, or the NI Act, was passed.
T81, the NI Act.
Right. This formalized the strict legal characteristics of checks, bills of exchange, and promissory notes. It basically created the legal bedrock for how a piece of paper could legally compel a transfer of funds.
Okay, so the legal foundation is laid in the 19th century. As we move into the 20th century, we hit what we can call the institutionalization phase. The volume of trade is growing, the number of checks being written is just exploding.
And this massive volume requires dedicated infrastructure. So in 1921, the Imperial Bank set up a formalized clearinghouse.
The physical place.
Yes, a central location where bank representatives could physically meet to exchange all the checks written by their respective customers and settle the differences.
Makes sense.
Then comes the monumental year, 1935. The RBI Act is passed, the Reserve Bank of India is formally established, and it subsequently takes over the management of these clearinghouses.
The ultimate referee steps onto the field.
Exactly.
But eventually, the sheer physical volume of economic growth starts to break the system. Let's fast forward to the 1980s. The sources highlight 1986 as a major turning point with the introduction of MICR magnetic ink character recognition, starting in Mumbai, then expanding to Chennai and New Delhi.
And to understand why MICR was introduced, you have to understand the crisis of the 1980s banking sector. It was literally drowning in a sea of paper.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
Millions of physical checks were being written every day. Each one had to be physically transported in vans, manually read by a human clerk, manually sorted into bins for different destination banks, tallied up by hand, and then transported again.
So clearing a check could take, what, weeks?
It could take weeks, yes. The backlog was staggering.
So it was a survival mechanism for the entire payment ecosystem. MICR allowed for mechanized sorting. Those strange, blocky numbers at the bottom of a check printed in that special magnetic ink, they could be read by high-speed machines. It took human error and human speed limits out of the initial sorting process.
It bought the system time. But the real explosion, the transition to the infrastructure we actually recognize today, that happens in the 21st century. This is the digital revolution phase.
Where things get really fast.
The technological leaps become rapid and relentless. In the early 1990s, we see the introduction of ECS, the electronic clearing service, moving away from paper entirely for repetitive payments.
And then 2004 brings a massive structural upgrade. The launch of the first RTGS, the real-time gross settlement system, which we will explore exactly how that works later, but essentially it allowed for massive, instantaneous bank-to-bank transfers.
Then in 2007, the legal framework had to catch up to the digital reality. So Parliament passed the PSS Act, the Payment and Settlement Systems Act. This is vital for your exam.
PSS Act of 2007.
Got it. The PSS Act legally designates the RBI as the supreme, unquestionable authority to regulate and oversee all payment and settlement systems in the country. It gave them the legal teeth they needed to govern the digital era.
The timeline accelerates crazily after that. 2008 sees two massive developments, the rollout of CTS, the check truncation system, and the establishment of the NPCI, the National Payments Corporation of India. Then, the watershed moment the whole world watched. 2016, the launch of UPI, the Unified Payments Interface.
Yeah, 2016 changed everything. And recently, the evolution has really been about availability. The plumbing used to, close for the weekend.
Right, no transfers on Sundays.
No more. In December 2019, the NEFT system went 24/7. And then in December 2020, RTGS went 24/7. The engine of the economy literally never sleeps now.
Which brings us to a final, absolutely crucial recent milestone mentioned in the text. July 2021, the RBI decided to grant non-bank entities direct access to centralized payment systems.
That is a fundamental shift in the architecture. Historically, only highly regulated licensed banks had direct access to the central RTGS and NEFT pipes. If a tech-driven payment startup wanted to move money, they had to partner with a traditional bank, route the money through that bank, pay a fee to that bank, and rely on that bank's technology.
A massive bottleneck.
In 2021, the RBI finally opened the direct gates to non-banks, completely altering the competitive landscape.
All right, so the gates are open, the timeline brings us to today, and the plumbing is thoroughly modernized. So that's section 2 of our blueprint done. But to really understand how this 21st century water supply actually operates on a day-to-day basis, we have to look closely at the valves, the pumps, and the gauges.
The terminology.
Yes, section 3, key terminology and definitions. The vocabulary in chapter 13 is incredibly dense, but it is basically the operating manual for the economy. We need to define these terms not just by reciting them, but by understanding their actual mechanics for the exam.
Let's start with the most encompassing term, financial market infrastructure, or FMI.
Okay, FMI.
The formal textbook definition is that an FMI is a multilateral system among participating institutions, including the operator of the system, used for the purposes of clearing, settling, or recording payments, securities, derivatives, or other financial transactions.
Okay, that is a mouthful. Let's ground that with an analogy for the listener.
Please do.
If my UPI app sending 10 rupees for a cup of tea is like a bicycle courier zipping through traffic, an SMI is the heavy-duty industrial freight train of the financial world.
I like that.
They are the massive, multilateral, highly complex systems hauling the entire macroeconomy's heavy cargo.
That is a very effective way to visualize it. And within that broad category of FMIs, there is a specialized critical subset called a systemically important payment system, or a SIPS.
SIPS,
Yeah.
systemically important.
Right. A SIPS is defined as a system that handles such massive volume and value that a failure within it has the potential to trigger or transmit severe systemic disruptions across the entire domestic or global economy. RTGS is the prime example of a SIPS.
So if my local bank's mobile app goes down, it's an inconvenience for a few thousand people. They get annoyed on Twitter. But if RTGS goes down, it is like the city's main water aqueduct bursting. The entire corporate and interbank liquidity market instantly freezes. That's why it is systemically important.
Exactly. You can't let it fail. And the ultimate goal of all these systems is a concept called settlement finality.
Settlement finality.
The exact definition you must know is this. Settlement finality is the discharge of an obligation by a transfer of funds or securities that has become irrevocable and unconditional.
Irrevocable and unconditional. Let's explore what that really means in practice because it's important.
Definitely.
If I hand you physical cash, it's final. You have the cash. But in the digital world, money is just a ledger entry. So finality means the moment the central bank updates its master ledger, there are absolutely no takebacks.
None.
Even if a bank realizes a second later they made a typo, or even if a court later orders the money returned, the original settlement itself cannot be unwound or reversed by the system. It is locked in stone. It is the ultimate done deal. And this is necessary because the receiving bank needs absolute certainty to then go and lend that money out 5 minutes later.
That absolute certainty is what prevents domino effect panics. Now, let's look at how legacy systems were modernized to achieve speed, starting with the check truncation system, or CTS, which we mentioned was introduced in 2008.
CTS.
CTS is the process of stopping the physical movement of a check issued by a drawer to the drawee branch and replacing it with an electronic image for clearing.
So go back to our 1980s nightmare of millions of checks in physical vans. With CTS, you deposit a piece of paper at your local branch. Instead of putting that paper on a truck to be driven across the country, where it could be delayed by a monsoon, stolen, or lost in a fire, the bank just takes a highly secure, encrypted digital photograph of the check.
And that's it.
They send the data and the image instantly to the clearinghouse, and the physical piece of paper basically goes into a shredder. It eliminates the geographical limitations and the physical transit risks entirely.
It completely revolutionized the speed of paper clearing. Now, for repetitive digital clearing, we have the National Automated Clearinghouse, or NACH. NACH. NACH is a pan-India system designed specifically for processing bulk repetitive payments.
Let's expand our train analogy from earlier. If RTGS is the high-speed freight train hauling massive cargo on demand, NACH is the commuter rail network.
Okay, how so?
Well, it doesn't leave the station every time one person arrives. It runs on a strict, predetermined schedule. It waits until all the passengers, meaning millions of repetitive, predictable little transactions, like corporate dividend payouts, government pension deposits, or, your monthly electricity bill auto deductions. It waits until they are fully loaded onto the train. Then it moves them all in one massive batch. It is incredibly cost-efficient for high-volume, low-value transactions.
That makes perfect sense. Moving over to the consumer security side of the digital boom, the text highlights tokenization.
Tokenization. I see this term everywhere now.
Yes. This is the process of replacing actual card details with unique alternate code called tokens for secure transactions. It's specifically designed to ensure that external merchants do not store sensitive card data on their own servers.
This one is vital for the modern e-commerce age. Think of tokenization like the ultimate valet parking ticket. You pull up to a fancy restaurant.
Yeah.
Your actual credit card number, the 16 digits, the expiry, the CVV, that's your physical car.
Right.
You give your card to the valet, which in this case is your bank or the card network. The valet parks the car securely in an underground vault and hands the restaurant, the online merchant, a little randomized paper ticket. That's the token.
Uh-huh.
The restaurant uses that token to request payment. If a hacker breaks into the restaurant's database and steals millions of those digital valet tickets, they are completely useless. They cannot be used to start your car or make purchases anywhere else.
It effectively devalues the data that hackers are trying to steal. It's brilliant. Now, let's pivot to a platform designed specifically for corporate finance. The Trade Receivables Discounting System, or TRED, T-R-E-D-S.
Travis?
This is a digital platform facilitating the financing of trade receivables, essentially invoices of micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs, drawn on corporate buyers. And the crucial part, the financing happens by way of discounting, strictly without recourse to the MSMEs.
Wait, if I am understanding the mechanics of this, I see a huge point of friction. Let me trace a transaction to make sure I get this.
Go for it.
I run a small garment factory in Tirupur. I'm an MSME. I sell a massive shipment of shirts to a giant multinational retail corporation. The corporation says, great shirts, but our policy is we pay invoices in 90 days.
Very common.
Right, but I can't wait 90 days. I have to pay my workers on Friday. So I take this 90-day invoice to the TRED-S platform. A financier, maybe a bank, sees it and says, I know the retail corporation is good for it. I'll buy this invoice from you right now for 95% of its face value. I get my cash immediately.
Yes, that's the discounting part.
But you emphasized without recourse. Did that mean if the giant retail corporation suddenly goes bankrupt on day 89 and defaults on the invoice, the financier who bought it cannot come knocking on my factory door in Tirupur to demand their money back?
That is exactly what it means, and it is a brilliantly engineered piece of regulatory design.
But why would anyone agree to that risk?
Because the financier is specifically pricing in the credit risk of the massive corporate buyer, not the small MSME. The without recourse clause is the protective shield for the microenterprise. In the traditional, unregulated world, large corporations often squeeze small suppliers with late payments, which just destroys their working capital. Once the MSME discounts their invoice on TRED-S and receives their funds from the financier, they are entirely off the hook.
Wow.
The risk is transferred to the entity best capitalized to handle it. It ensures the lifeblood of the economy, the small businesses, actually survive corporate payment delays.
That is like systemic empathy built into financial plumbing.
I love that. Okay, let's look at one more pair of terms for this section that our listeners really need to nail down because they sound so similar. Payment aggregators, or PAs, versus payment gateways, or PGs. Oh, examiners love testing this difference. The distinction lies entirely in the flow of funds. Payment aggregators facilitate merchants in accepting various payment instruments from customers. Crucially, they receive the customer's money, pool those funds together, and then transfer them to the merchants after a specified time.
Okay, they pool the funds.
Yes. Payment gateways, conversely, provide the pure technology infrastructure to route and facilitate the processing of an online transaction without any involvement in the actual handling of funds.
So, to burn this into your memory for the exam, associate the word aggregator with a physical bucket.
Yeah.
When you buy a shirt online, your money drops into the aggregator's bucket. They hold it for a day or two, pool it with thousands of other purchases, and then pour the bucket out into the merchant's bank account. They touch the cash.
Yes.
A gateway is just a secure, open door. It verifies the data, encrypts the connection, and routes the approval message, but the gateway itself never holds a single rupee of the actual cash. Aggregators hold money. Gateways route data.
Exactly. Keep that clear and you'll ace any question on it. So we've defined the infrastructure and the plumbing, but who actually owns, operates, and regulates all these pipes?
Right. This moves us to Section 4 of our blueprint, important figures and names, the institutional map of this ecosystem. And at the absolute pinnacle of this hierarchy is the Reserve Bank of India.
We mentioned earlier they wear 3 hats. Let's really spell that out for the infographic. First, the RBI is the system provider. They literally own and operate the critical centralized pipes, the SIPS, like RTGS, and FT.
Provider, check.
Second, they are the regulator. Empowered under the PSS Act of 2007, they have the absolute authority to grant licenses, mandate security standards, and penalize any entity in the payment space.
Regulate, check.
Third, they are a user. The RBI acts as the banker to the government and the banker to other banks, actively sending massive volumes of transactions through their own systems.
Provider, regulator, user. But they don't do this oversight blindly, right? To handle the sheer regulatory weight, the text mentions a specific committee, the Board for Regulation and Supervision of Payment and Settlement Systems, or BPSS.
Yes. The BPSS is the designated authority. It is a specialized committee carved out of the RBI's Central Board of Directors. They're basically the brains trust exclusively responsible for formulating policies and executing the functions mandated by the PSS Act.
Okay, and underneath the RBI, we have perhaps the most fascinating institution in the entire global payment landscape, the National Payments Corporation of India, the NPCI.
The NPCI was established in 2008 as a joint initiative of the RBI and the Indian Banks Association. It acts as the central umbrella organization for operating all retail payments and settlement systems in India. But the critical exam-defining feature of the NPCI is its corporate structure. It was incorporated under Section 8 of the Companies Act as a not-for-profit company.
I really want to expand on the implications of that not-for-profit status, because if you look at the rest of the world, retail payment networks like Visa or MasterCard are massive, multi-billion-dollar publicly traded corporations driven relentlessly by profit margins and shareholder returns.
Right. Their goal is to make money for shareholders.
Exactly. They extract a percentage from almost every transaction as a toll. India looked at the digital revolution and made a deliberate philosophical choice. Digital payment infrastructure is a public good, much like the national highway system. You don't build a highway to maximize the profits of the toll booths. You build the highway to lower friction so the entire economy can accelerate.
That philosophical choice totally dictates the economics. Because the NPCI does not have to generate massive dividends for shareholders, it was able to facilitate an ecosystem like UPI with an incredibly low or even zero merchant discount rate, or MDR.
Zero MDR, that's huge.
It removed the primary barrier to entry for millions of small merchants. If it cost a street vendor 2% of their margin to accept a digital payment, they would just stick to cash. By making the infrastructure practically free at the point of use, the NPCI drove unprecedented world-leading scale and adoption.
It is a masterclass in macroeconomic architecture.
Mm.
Okay, another crucial entity on this institutional map handles a very different kind of scale. The Clearing Corporation of India, Ltd., or CCIL.
Set up in 2001, the CCIL serves as the central counterparty, or CCP, specifically for government securities, foreign exchange, and money markets.
Let's explain what a central counterparty actually does, because it sounds like bureaucratic jargon, but it is actually a vital defense mechanism against financial contagion.
It really is.
Imagine a massive, multi-billion rupee trade between Bank A and Bank B. They agree to the deal. But what happens if, an hour later, Bank B suffers a catastrophic failure and goes bankrupt before the trade is actually settled? Bank A is left holding the bag, suffers a massive loss, and maybe Bank A goes bankrupt too. This is bilateral counterparty risk. It creates a terrifying domino effect. So how does CCIL stop the dominoes from falling?
They utilize a powerful legal mechanism called novation.
Novation.
Yes, the absolute second that Bank A and Bank B agree to their trade, the CCIL steps in the middle and effectively tears up that bilateral contract. They instantly replace it with two new separate contracts. The CCIL legally agrees to buy from Bank A, and the CCIL legally agrees to sell to Bank B.
Oh, I see the genius in that. So Bank A is no longer relying on the financial health of Bank B at all. They only have to trust the CCIL.
Exactly.
And because the CCIL is immensely capitalized and backed by the RBI, the risk of default drops to virtually zero. It isolates the infection so the whole banking system doesn't catch the flu from one sick bank.
Precisely. It brings stability to highly volatile wholesale markets. Finally, under the NPCI umbrella, we have two specialized subsidiaries driving specific agendas. We have NPCI Bharat Bill Pay Ltd., or NVBL, which is the authorized central unit orchestrating the interoperable Bharat Bill Payment System, standardizing how you pay everything from school fees to electricity bills.
Right.
And we have NPCI International Payments Limited, or NIPL.
The global ambassadors.
Yeah.
While NBBL is making sure you can easily pay your local water bill from your phone, NIPL is out there aggressively negotiating with foreign governments and networks to ensure you can use your UPI app to pay for a coffee in Singapore, Paris, or Dubai. They are literally exporting India's digital public infrastructure to the world.
It is a highly strategic geopolitical and economic move. Okay, so now, as we build this mental framework, we absolutely cannot ignore the raw data. Exams are notoriously unforgiving when it comes to specific numbers, limits, and percentages.
They love a multiple choice question with 4 very similar numbers.
Exactly. We need to weave these vital statistics into our understanding of how the system functions in reality. This brings us to Section 5 of the blueprint: vital statistics and empirical data. Let's pull the most critical numbers from the text and put them in context. We'll start with 50,000.
Okay, 50,000.
50,000 is the threshold established for the positive pay system concerning high-value checks.
To understand why this exists, you really have to understand check fraud. Criminals will literally steal a check from a mailbox, use chemicals to wash the ink away, and rewrite the amount or the payee name. To combat this, the RBI introduced positive pay.
Right.
If you write a check for 50,000 and more, you are strongly advised, and for amounts above 5 lakhs, banks may actually make it mandatory to electronically submit the key details of that check, like the date, name, and amount, to your bank through your app or net banking.
Double verification.
Exactly. When the physical paper check arrives at the clearinghouse, CTS cross-references the scanned image against the digital details you provided. If they don't match, the check bounces, preventing the fraud. 50,000 is the mathematical line where the RBI decided the risk of fraud outweighs the slight friction of asking the customer for that double verification.
Exactly. It beautifully balances security with convenience. Another crucial limit you need to know is 1,000 tick. As of a recent update on December 12, 2023, this is the new, significantly expanded limit for the execution of e-mandates without requiring an additional factor of authentication, or AFA.
Okay, an e-mandate is basically an auto-pay instruction. Historically, the RBI was very cautious. They wanted an OTP and additional factor of authentication for almost everything to prevent unauthorized recurring charges.
Which is safe, but annoying.
Right. Consumers found it incredibly frustrating to have their massive, legitimate monthly bills fail because they missed an OTP text message. So the RBI raised the limit where auto-pay can happen invisibly to one of your resolvent. But crucially, they restricted this high limit to very specific, highly regulated, necessary categories: mutual fund subscriptions, insurance premium payments, and credit card bill repayments. They aren't letting you auto-pay a lakh to an unknown online casino. It is strictly for foundational financial hygiene.
It reduces friction in wealth accumulation and debt management. Moving to global reach, the number 200 is significant. The text notes that RuPay co-branded cards, so cards issued in partnership with international networks like Discover Financial Services, JCB in Japan, and China UnionPay, are now accepted at point-of-sale machines and ATMs in approximately 200 countries worldwide.
It just shows the evolution of RuPay from a purely domestic, localized card scheme to a genuine international competitor.
Now let's talk about how the RBI actually measures their success. The number 100. 100 serves as the base score for the RBI Digital Payments Index, or the RBI DPI. This index was specifically constructed to capture the extent of digitization of payments across the country. The base period was set as March 2018. So March 2018 equals a score of 100, and every subsequent period is measured relative to that baseline to track the massive growth.
But the index isn't just a single raw number of transactions, is it? The text says it is composed of 5 broad parameters.
Yes, and the weighting of those parameters is deeply revealing of the RBI's philosophy. The 5 parameters are payment enablers, weighted at 25%, representing things like internet penetration and bank account availability. Demand-side infrastructure at 10%, meaning factors like FASTag issuance or debit cards issued. Supply-side infrastructure at 15%, looking at the number of ATMs and point-of-sale terminals deployed. Payment performance holds a massive 45% weight. And finally, consumer centricity, looking at grievance redressal, is weighted at 5%.
I really want to focus intensely on that 35% weight for payment performance. This is a brilliant piece of index design. If the RBI only cared about making the infrastructure look good on paper, they would heavily weight the supply side. Banks could just dump 1 million card swiping machines into rural villages, pat themselves on the back, and drive the index way up, even if those machines just gathered dust in a closet.
I see.
But by placing almost half the entire weight of the index on payment performance, which measures the actual volume and value of transactions taking place, the RBI ensures that the index only goes up if the citizens are actually adopting and using the system. It rigorously favors behavioral action over mere structural setup.
It absolutely prevents vanity metrics from clouding the regulatory reality. Speaking of deploying infrastructure, let's look at the percentage range of 60% to 90%. This refers to the massive financial subsidy provided under the Payments Infrastructure Development Fund, or PIDF scheme.
Why does a bank need a subsidy to install a card machine? Because the pure economics of rural India. If a bank installs a point-of-sale terminal at a high-end electronics store in Mumbai, the transaction volumes are huge, the fees are high, and the machine pays for itself in days. But if they install that same machine at a small grocer in a Tier 6 town, the merchant might process, what, €12.50 transactions a week? The bank loses money maintaining the hardware. To overcome this purely capitalist bottleneck and bridge the urban-rural divide, the RBI utilizes the PIDF to subsidize 60% to 90% of the cost of physical and digital payment acceptance devices in Tier 3 to Tier 6 centers
Yeah.
and the northeastern states. They're literally paying to lay the pipes where the free market simply won't.
And the final vital statistic for this section traces back to our discussion on check clearing efficiency, 3-to-1.
3-to-1. This represents the ultimate consolidation of the CTS architecture. Originally, to handle the vast geography of India, the system operated with 3 separate MICR grids located regionally in New Delhi, Chennai, and Mumbai.
Yes.
But eventually, as technology and bandwidth improved, these 3 separate hubs were collapsed into one single, unified national grid operated entirely out of Chennai. A massive efficiency gain, creating a truly singular national clearing mechanism.
So, we have the timeline, the definitions, the institutions, and the data. Now we must connect them. We arrive at the most conceptually demanding part of our analysis, Section 6, cause and effect relationships. Exam questions at this level rarely just ask you to recite a fact. They test your understanding of the underlying logic flows. Why did X happen, and what was the systemic consequence?
Let's trace the causality of the major shifts described in the chapter.
The first major logic flow we've sort of touched upon, but let's formalize it for the blueprint. Cause. In the 1980s, an exploding economy led to a massive, physically unmanageable volume of paper checks that threatened to completely overwhelm the banking system's clearing capacity.
Effect. The RBI intervened by introducing MICR reader sorters to mechanize the most labor-intensive part of the sorting process.
Result. This initial digitization of data eventually paved the necessary technological path to the image-based check truncation system, or CTS, which drastically reduced the time it takes to clear a check and mitigated the severe risks of physical transit fraud.
Cause, effect, result. The friction of the physical world forcing a digital evolution. What is the next logical flow?
Cause number 2 involves government welfare. The government needed a secure, efficient mechanism to route vast amounts of financial subsidies directly to the intended beneficiaries. Historically, this was plagued by massive leakage, bureaucratic friction, and outright corruption.
Effect. The NPCI developed a highly specialized infrastructure known as the Aadhaar Payment Bridge, or APB.
Result. This allowed for the successful massive-scale execution of the Direct Benefit Transfer, or DBT, scheme. The government could now use a citizen's unique Aadhaar number as a financial address to route funds directly into their linked bank account.
To really visualize the impact of this, think about how subsidies used to work. It was like handing a large bag of cash to a regional manager who took a cut and handed it to a district manager who took a cut and handed it to a village head.
And so on.
Right. By the time it reached the impoverished farmer, half the cash was gone, lost to the friction of middlemen. The Aadhaar Payment Bridge operates like a fleet of highly targeted, mathematically verified express delivery drones. The government inputs the Aadhaar number, the system finds the exact bank account linked to that biometric identity, and the drone drops the package, the full, undiluted subsidy, directly into the beneficiary's secure vault, completely bypassing the entire corrupt chain of local middlemen. The macroeconomic efficiency and the social impact of that engineering is just staggering.
It is arguably one of the most successful implementations of digital public infrastructure in the world. Let's examine a third logic flow, focusing on risk management. Cause. As electronic payment systems grew in volume and complexity, there developed a high concentration of systemic risk within the core financial market infrastructures, the FMIs we defined earlier. If one of these massive central hubs failed, the contagion would be catastrophic.
Effect. Recognizing this vulnerability, the RBI formally adopted the CPSS IOSCO Principles for Financial Market Infrastructure, often abbreviated as PFMI. This is a set of rigorous, internationally recognized standards for risk management.
Result. The adoption of PFMI led to a regime of stringent, continuous monitoring and assessment of these FMIs by the RBI. The central bank now constantly evaluates FMIs based on their daily transaction volume, their market share, and their interconnectedness with other systems. They enforce intense capital requirements and operational resilience standards specifically to prevent systemic financial shocks. If an FMI even hints at catching a cold, the RBI's monitoring ensures the broader economy doesn't catch pneumonia.
And the final major cause and effects flow mentioned in the text.
Cause. Over the last decade, we witnessed an explosion of non-bank entities, fintech startups, prepaid payment instrument issuers, white-label ATM operators. They were driving incredible innovation and consumer adoption in the retail payment space. However, structurally, they were entirely reliant on traditional licensed banks to actually settle their funds and move the money.
This created a massive bottleneck. The nimble tech innovators were forced to route everything through the legacy architecture of their bank partners.
Effect. In July 2021, the RBI made a monumental regulatory pivot. They officially allowed these non-bank entities direct access to the centralized payment systems, meaning direct access to the core RTGS and NEFI networks.
Result: by removing the banking middlemen from the plumbing, this direct access significantly reduced the overall cost of routing payments, lowered systemic risk by decreasing the dependency on a few major sponsor banks, and eliminated operational uncertainty regarding settlement finality for the tech firms. It essentially leveled the playing field. The innovators didn't have to rent a hose from the banks anymore. They got to plug their pipes directly into the city's main high-pressure water supply.
It was a massive democratization of the core infrastructure. Now we arrive at the final major analytical component of our deep dive. Section 7, the comparative matrix. There are several concepts in Chapter 13 that are incredibly nuanced and are best understood in direct contrast to one another. Let's mentally construct a comparative table to lock in the differences between these systems.
Let's start with the big one, comparing RTGS against NEF. On the surface, they seem identical. They're both operated directly by the RBI. They both move money electronically from one bank to another, but their underlying mechanics and their target uses are fundamentally different. Let's break them down by settlement type, target use, and processing style.
For settlement, the distinction is in the acronyms. RTGS is real-time and gross. NetFT operates on deferred net settlement, usually in half-hourly batches.
Let's slow down and really simulate the ledger math here, because gross versus net is a concept that confuses so many people, but it is brilliant once you see it.
Absolutely. Let's walk through it.
Let's say we have three banks, Bank A, Bank B, and Bank C. In a gross settlement system like RTGS, every single transaction is processed individually, exactly as it occurs. So if Bank A sends €100 to Bank B, the central bank immediately deducts the 100 from A and adds it to B. 5 minutes later, if Bank B sends €80 to Bank A, the central bank moves euro back. The RBI had to physically move €180 of actual liquidity through the system to settle those two trades. It requires massive amounts of cash sitting in accounts to facilitate instant movement.
It is highly liquidity intensive, but it provides instantaneous, irrevocable finality.
Exactly. Now let's look at NetFT's net settlement. In NetFT, the central bank puts a pause button on reality. They say, we're going to wait 30 minutes, everyone submit your transactions, but we won't move any money yet. During that 30 minutes, Bank A sends 100 to B, Bank B sends 80 to A, and maybe Bank A sends 30 to C.
Okay, a lot of back and forth.
Right. At the end of the 30 minutes, the central bank's computer simply tallies up the net difference. It looks at the math and says, okay, instead of moving all this money back and forth individually, the final algebraic result is simply that Bank A needs to pay out 50 total, Bank B receives 20 total, and Bank C receives 30 total. The RBI then executes one single synchronized ledger update, moving just €50 to settle 210 worth of gross economic activity.
The liquidity efficiency of netting is just astounding. It allows the banking system to process millions of retail transactions without needing trillions of rupees in idle cash sitting at the central bank. And this dictates their target use. Because RTGS is instant and liquidity heavy, it is designed primarily for wholesale, high-value, corporate, and interbank transfers where immediate finality is worth the cost. Because NFT is incredibly efficient through batch netting, it is designed for retail, one-to-one, lower-value transfers where waiting 30 minutes is perfectly acceptable.
Okay, that comparison is locked in. Let's look at another category that causes confusion: the classification of physical cards. We all use plastic, but the hardware interface determines the security.
The text categorizes them based on the physical interaction at the point of sale. First, you have a swiped card. This relies on the oldest technology, the magnetic stripe. It is essentially the same technology as a cassette tape, carrying static data, making it highly vulnerable to cloning or skimming. Then you have a dipped card. This utilizes a microprocessor chip embedded in the card, known as EMV technology.
And the chip generates a unique cryptographic code for every single transaction, making it nearly impossible for a thief to clone the card and use it later, because the code they stole is already expired.
Exactly, and the most modern iteration is the tapped card, which uses contactless near-field communication, or NFC technology, utilizing radio frequencies to communicate with the terminal over a very short distance without physical insertion.
So, swiped is magnetic and vulnerable, dipped is chip-based and secure, tapped is radio-based and fast. Let's move to digital wallets, legally known as prepaid payment instruments, or PPIs. The text divides these into three strict regulatory categories.
The categories are closed, semi-closed, and open PPIs. A closed PPI is something like a specific retail store's gift card. You can only spend it at that one specific brand, and you cannot withdraw cash. A semi-closed PPI is like most popular digital wallets. You can use it at millions of different merchants who accept that wallet's network, but crucially, you still cannot withdraw your balance as hard cash at an ATM. The defining difference for the exam is the open PPI.
An open PPI allows the user to do everything: buy goods, transfer funds, and actually walk up to an ATM and withdraw physical cash.
And because of that specific ability to convert digital numbers back into untraceable physical paper cash, open PPIs carry immense anti-money laundering and systemic liquidity risks. Therefore, the RBI mandates that open PPIs can only be issued by fully licensed, highly regulated banks. Non-bank tech companies can issue semi-closed and closed wallets, provided they get the necessary RBI authorization, but the cash-out capability is fiercely guarded by the banking sector.
It is all about controlling the borders between the digital ledger and physical reality. We already thoroughly unpacked payment aggregators versus payment gateways. Earlier, aggregators handle the bucket of funds. Gateways just provide the digital door for data. But it is worth mentioning again because examiners love to test your understanding of where the actual money flows versus where just the data flows.
And with that comprehensive comparison, the architecture of our mental blueprint is fundamentally complete.
Wow. Okay, let's take a collective breath. Think about the journey we just took. If you have been tracking with us, listening closely to the mechanics, you no longer just have a superficial summary of Chapter 13. You possess a deeply engineered, three-dimensional understanding of India's financial plumbing.
You really do.
You understand the sweeping historical evolution, moving from ancient hundas traded on trust to a sovereign paper monopoly, right up to the 24/7 digital perfection of RTGS. You know the institutional landscape. You understand exactly why the NPCI's public good, not-for-profit model was the secret weapon that allowed UPI to conquer the nation, contrasting with profit-driven networks. You have a mental vault storing the logic behind vital limits like the 50,000 positive pay threshold, and you can clearly mathematically articulate the brilliant liquidity efficiency of a net settlement system versus a gross settlement system. You don't just know what the pipes are. You deeply understand why the city planners laid them where they did and how the water flows through them.
You are incredibly well equipped to tackle the material. You understand the mechanisms, not just the vocabulary. But before we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Something that takes everything we've just discussed and points it directly at the horizon of global finance.
I love looking at the horizon. What is the final thought?
We spent time discussing NPCI International, NIPL, and their aggressive mandate to take UPI global. The text explicitly mentions the successful, groundbreaking interlinking of India's fast payment system, UPI, with Singapore's equivalent system, PayNow. It also references India's active participation in Project Nexus, a massive initiative spearheaded by the Bank for International Settlements, aiming to seamlessly link domestic fast payment systems across dozens of countries by 2026.
So we're moving from a domestic water supply to a truly global, interconnected plumbing grid.
Precisely. So the question to ponder is this. For decades, cross-border payments have been dominated by correspondent banking and messaging networks like SWIFT. SWIFT isn't actually a settlement system. It is essentially a highly secure email system where banks message each other to move money through slow, expensive intermediaries. But if domestic fast payment systems globally merge into a single, seamless, interoperable international grid functioning in real time, where sending rupees from Delhi to a merchant in Paris happens as instantly and cheaply as sending money to your neighbor, what happens to the traditional legacy global banking structures?
Oh, wow. SWIFT could become technologically obsolete for retail transactions.
It faces an existential threat. But more importantly, from a regulatory standpoint, if national borders in retail finance become completely invisible and transactions settle globally in milliseconds, what new, unprecedented systemic risks might that hyper-global interconnectedness bring to the RBI's doorstep? If the entire world's financial plumbing becomes one giant, instantly connected water supply, what happens to domestic monetary policy when a liquidity crisis in one country can instantly drain through the pipes into another?
If a contagion starts somewhere else, and the pipes are wide open and instant, how fast does the sickness spread? It is a fascinating and slightly terrifying thought experiment about the future of money. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep journey. Review the concepts, visualize the mechanical blueprint we built together today, and trust that you now truly understand the invisible engine running beneath the economy. Good luck on mastering the material.